All right. I am now joined by Djene Bajalan, and who requires no introduction, being an OG, and also by Rob Larson, who is obviously somebody I have on because I'm very comfortable with him because he's a socialist with beard and who has a beard and glasses and wears sports coat and drinks whiskey. So like that just makes me, that puts me at my ease, But but also he's the kind of academic who, in theory, libertarians should hate the least because he's an economics professor. But how are you guys doing today?
I'm doing good. I kind of feel like I missed something by not putting my sports jacket on.
That's a little. That's we'll give you a pass this time.
We could have been triplets. And also, interesting fact: Rob is the person who comes up in my Facebook friend recommendations the most. I see his face with his hat on, like every time I open up Facebook.
That's a natural recommendation. Facebook's trying to make your life better by having me be your friend. We should take the leap and click on that, man. That's
I know. I've been flirting with it. Shall I click on Rob? Shall we be friends? I mean, it's not a big commit. It's not Tinder, so we're not like making a big commitment. But
that's what I thought too. But it turns out now Facebook is the metaverse, so who knows how connected we're going to be? It's a mystery.
Oh yeah, that's true. The suit. Wait, is China banning the metaverse now? Is it? Or am I missing that? Somebody was tweeting about that. Anyway, we're deflecting the conversation. Shame on us. Sorry for being rude in your house, Ben.
Yeah, well, it's yet another thing you get a pass for right now. I don't know how many more of these I have to hand out, but there we go. So I thought that for this one, for this week, we would do a short and sweet one, which is a debate that was actually, I think it was a couple days ago. It was posted on YouTube yesterday. That is in one of my favorite genres of debates that are on YouTube, which is Sam Seder debates libertarians who call into the Majority Report. It's a body of work that includes classics like Walter Block. We had Yarn Brook saying that the Miami condo collapse was the fault of the renters for not doing proper investigation into how often there were safety checks before they moved in. So there's a lot of good stuff in this. I really enjoy the way that Sam does these. And in this case in particular, I'm eager to watch this because this is with not just any old libertarian. In fact, I think these people have like obscure sectarian reasons I don't really care about for disliking the term libertarian, but a particular kind, which is an objectivist. So these would be followers of the philosophy of Ayn Rand, who famously taught generations of 19-year-olds who read Atlas Shrugged when they're sophomores in college that selfishness is not actually a bad thing. It's actually very awesome. And if you understand the laws of logic and the A is A, you will understand that we need unregulated free market capitalism.
Didn't she also have a cult, like a creepy little cult around her as well? Or am I mixing her up with someone else?
It's been a while since I read about it, but if you explore anything around Ayn Rand's actual personal, the circle of people she influenced during her actual lifetime, it's not inspiring in terms of how unbelievably rational people are, and how and their whole thing is being objective and detached. And the moment her boyfriend, it's the biggest explosion you've ever seen. And whatever, I mean, the affairs of the heart, that's going to happen. But I also don't have a doctrine called cool rationalism that I then transgress the moment I have a crazy emotional meltdown about my boyfriend not worshiping me enough or not in the right way. It's been a while.
Yeah. I think he left her, and then immediately they put out like a public statement about how he was no longer truly an objectivist, and he betrayed their principles, which does feel a little our good friend Tom from Yakubia, who out of the sort of cast of characters who would sort of people with names like this, circle around TMBS, in the golden age, that was always, Dave from Jamaica, all these guys who were sort of like felt like characters, who'd be on, Howard Stern, back in the day. But Tom from Yakubi always, that's definitely the best name. Like that's like I think you got to give it that. But yes, Tom says cult is such an ugly and appropriate term.
They remind me of the Mujahideen Khalq, like this weird Iranian radical organization where the leader wanted to marry the wife of his deputy leader, so he wrote like a big book about how she should leave him and then she should marry him, and they called it the ideological revolution.
Very Henry whichever it was, Henry VIII.
Henry VIII.
Yeah, it's like I'm going to fuck this woman. I don't care how many new religions I have to create to do it. Like that's look. I mean, that's dedication.
No, it is. Although I've always wondered how it feels to be a devout Anglican and know that that's the origin of your faith.
Yes. When I was recently enjoying the new Ben Burgess book on Chris Hitchens, which will be released soon, just occasionally the Anglican Church comes up because his brother Peter, is still a strong figure in it, and Hitchens has a whole history with them. I have to say, like of all the religions, I think only like the Seventh-day Adventists have a harder time like defending the origin of their church. Sorry, I'm helping us wander away as well. But these are the things you got to think about when you look at the history of sects.
I went to a Church of England school briefly as a child. They weren't, they were like, hey, you can believe what you like. The Big Bang happened, but God could have done it too. And it's like, okay, whatever. We get to sing some hymns.
Well, there's actually a reference. There's a funny line, I think, in one of the introduction to one of the editions of Capital, where Marx says that at that point historically, the Church of England would object more to attempts to expropriate 1/39 of its property than denial of all 39 of its articles of faith.
Right.
Yeah. I would also say, Darius Hennon says true altruism even a thing. Everything we do is in some way benefit ourselves, even if it's something small, like it makes me feel good to give to others. I think the earnest answer here is the distinction that you got to make is between do you gain some satisfaction from carrying out your values, but like that's of course, right? I mean, like almost definitionally, but that's different from saying that the only thing you value is your own satisfaction. If the only thing you valued was your own satisfaction, you wouldn't derive any satisfaction from giving to others. The fact that you derive satisfaction from giving to others and not from, kicking homeless people in the face, shows that you, in fact, value something other than your own, feelings. And to be fair, even Ayn Rand would say that your true interests lie not necessarily in anything that gives you satisfaction in the moment, but in, becoming a like flourishing, creative, entrepreneurial is kind of the subtext to this, person who's remaking the world and, and for, all this stuff. Right. So even she is not quite doing anything quite as crude as saying that like, it's just about making yourself be happy. Although, my big question about this, I mean, you can watch the debate I did last year with Yarn Brook, is why is it that, okay, great. I could go along with you about the idea that, living up to your full potential and, blah, blah, blah. Like this is sort of what's good for a person in some sense, but like, what about everybody else living up to their full potential? Don't they count too? And, and if we could like, and if you have to sacrifice your interests a little bit to like pay some taxes that benefit everybody else and make it easier for everybody else to live their best life, what's the, that's where I always get off the boat from this line of thought.
It's the most American ideology you could imagine, a superficial justification for selfishness and capitalism. It's like, it's the kind of ideology that if you went to a country like when I was in Turkey or in the Middle East and you tried to explain like what libertarian is, they would think you were bonkers. Like the reactionaries would think you were bonkers. They'd be like, this makes no sense. Like, and like you go into the whole libertarian thing about economics, they'd be like, what are you talking about? This is like total nonsense, like both on the right and the left of the political spectrum. This is like a pure like Western European American thing, as opposed to something that would make sense to people even on the political right in the developing world. I know they're like promoting this stuff through I don't think they have these institutions across Latin America, but it's still very much a kind of like foreign imposition on these regions of the world where developmentalism is so critical to both the left and the right.
Well, I mean, Rob brought up the Hitchens book earlier, and Christopher Hitchens actually had a very funny line. I think it was one of the C-SPAN appearances in the 90s, I think, where somebody actually is responding to a caller who, and I so he was responding to a caller on C-SPAN, and I think I posted the clip of this, and the guy who was actually the caller back in the 90s emailed me about it, which was kind of fun. But there's a caller to C-SPAN in the 90s who asked Hitchens what he thought about objectivism and Ayn Rand, and and his response was, well, I think it's oh, that's right, we actually played it on the show. And he said, I think it's quaint and rather charming that there's a movement that thinks that Americans aren't yet selfish enough.
Yep.
I doubt we're going to top that, but we'll do our best.
That's a good one. And I'm excited to talk about this on Tuesday with you as well. Next Tuesday, it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Going on. This is Revolution to talk about the Hitchens book, which feels. I mean, there are definitely times when, when I feel on that show, like if you've ever watched, there's the old Simpsons episode where they're watching a movie that exists within the world of the Simpsons called Blackula Meets Black Dracula, and there's the character in the movie, who says, "I'm going to turn this disco into a hockey rink," and then they both attack him. It's like that. That's it can feel a little bit like that sometimes, but always fun anyway.
What's the Haitian Revolution experience?
That's right. All right. Let's start this up. So this is one of the best things about the majority report is that they will take calls from anybody. That was, in fact, once I actually the first time I ever met. Actually, the only time that I ever met Sam Seder in person, all the other interactions have been over, YouTube, but it was because Michael Brooks had brought up this debate that I'd had with a couple of Jordan Peterson fans, and he kind of relayed, what he remembered me saying about it. They both laughed about it, and then the people themselves got really upset about it. And they put out a video, complaining about it. And so the first time, when I met Sam at there was a TMBS live show in Brooklyn, his opening line, I think, was, "Oh yeah, you're the one who got us in trouble." But with those guys. But of course, what he did is generously offered that anytime they wanted, they could call into the show, to process their beef. And of course, for whatever reason, that didn't happen. But in this case, I was getting a call from an objectivist, so this should be fun. Let's start up, and let's and remember to Mute yourself while you're not talking, just there's no background noise.
Let's watch.
Calling from a 571 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Hi, this is Dan. I'm calling from California.
Dan from California. What's on your mind?
I was listening to the show yesterday, and there was a brief reference to Atlas Shrugged at one point.
Okay.
I think Emma said that she learned about, quote, Atlas Shrugged and all that bullshit, unquote.
Okay.
So that was interesting to me. And
What
I was curious to...
What do you mean by interesting?
Well, I have a very different view of Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged myself. So
all right.
I want to see if we could discuss that a bit.
Sure.
And hear why she thinks that of it or what you think of it.
Yes. Bullshit. Dan, let me ask you a question. Did you and I talk last week?
Yes. I'm the one who called in about the chat policy.
About the chat policy. Everything's coming together now. Are you a libertarian, Dan?
No, I'm an objectivist.
What does that mean?
Well,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Objectivism is an entire philosophy. That's one thing. It's not just a political philosophy.
Also, it's a religion too.
Well, I don't know.
Well, wait a second.
No, it's anti-religion.
Yeah, tell me what it is, not just what it isn't.
Okay, so in there's 5 branches of philosophy, and I could go through and just actually Ayn Rand was actually asked, "Can you say what objectivism is while standing on one foot?" And she did that once. There's an article called "Introducing Objectivism," which you can find on the internet, and she does this. So I can give you the brief standing on one foot version. So in metaphysics, the view of what is the fundamental nature of reality like, she thinks there's just one world. There's no supernatural world. There's no God. It's just this world which we perceive with our senses and which we understand with our reason. And then second branch, epistemology, in other words, the study of the nature of knowledge. She's pro-reason. So she's anti-faith, which makes her anti-religion.
Okay.
She only believes in what you can prove by logic and reason and evidence of your senses. And then third branch, ethics. How should we live? She believes in a morality of rational self-interest. So you should do what's best for yourself.
Right.
I know that
while respecting the rights of others. Neither sacrificing yourself to others nor others to yourself.
Right. Okay.
Fourth branch, the final branch.
Now that would you say that third branch, the one about pursuing your own self-interests, that one's when we start getting into politics a little bit, right?
Yeah. So she believes in individual rights. In her last branch, political philosophy, she believes in capitalism, and the way she understands that, I think it's often smeared today, but how she understands it is that you can't initiate force against other people. If you did that, you would be violating their rights. So you can do whatever you want as long as you don't use physical force against other people.
Right. The non-aggression policy, right?
How do you think
that's what libertarians sometimes call it. I think she didn't use that phrase. Sometimes it's called the non-initiation of force principle.
Fair enough.
But
fair enough. Now, these are things that you subscribe to too, right? I mean, this isn't. I mean, she's just the person who came up with this stuff. You don't perceive her as some type of like demigod or anything,
or like a deity, right? Since it's not religious in nature.
I mean, I admire her tremendously.
I mean, that
but
comes
I don't
across.
think she's like a supernatural being.
Okay, but I mean, in terms of like just non-supernatural beings, she's right up there, right? Like, I mean, she's almost supernatural.
She's like Plato, basically,
right?
I think she was a heroic person, and she lived a very.
Did it bum you out when
life.
you found out that she took Social Security?
No, actually, I recently produced a video about that, which I'm going to be releasing soon on my YouTube channel, which deals with the that smear of her that she was a hypocrite for taking money back that was looted from her through this program. And she
I see.
actually discussed it herself in her article, The Question of Scholarships, which is available free on the internet. So there's no problem at all. It's perfectly consistent with her principles of non-coercion.
I see. Okay. She was just retrieving her property, as it were.
Exactly.
What about Medicare?
Well, she thinks that people should not be forced to pay for others' people.
Actually, Medicare pays out more than it takes in. That's why I asked Medicare.
Well, it's premised on taxation. Everything that is funded by taxation is funded by a coercive means.
Right.
So if you want to voluntarily help pay for other people's healthcare, you are free to do that in a capitalist system.
Right.
What you are not free to do is to forcibly take others people's money and make them.
Don't believe in taxation. Don't believe in taxation.
Oh, or coercion.
Right.
Right.
If you understand that to mean coercion, then right, she's against it.
She's against tax. Well, taxation is necessarily coercive. You don't really get a choice. If you're going to be a member of this society,
I've heard people define it in different ways. Some people think, some people talk about voluntary taxes, and you might not want to use the word.
There's no such thing as voluntary
taxes. You
taxes.
understand it in the
taxes are coercive.
Yeah. One thing that just jumps out at me about this right away is that, of course, this is not a religion. There's nothing that smells of religion about any of this, but also it's very important to use exactly the right terms to describe it, right? Don't call it the non-aggression principle, call it the non-initiation of force principle, because Ayn personally never called it the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, for something that's not a religion, there's a huge amount of orthodoxy and doctrine that we're getting here. And of course, it's just a guy calling into a show. But as Ben was saying earlier, we've debated a lot of libertarians. Like, this is a common turn.
Yeah, I mean, this just reminds me of Eastern Orthodox theologians argue with Catholic theologians about whether you should say "and the Son," when you do the profession of faith. That it's there's some super obscure reason. You should all either call it the non-aggression principle or the non-initiation of force principle.
Yeah, I think even with ideologies that are not explicitly believing in the supernatural, there's a sort of way in which they can become religious-like in the way that the adherents follow them, that they have this kind of metaphysics and this sort of underlying ideology. You see it on the left, for example, with hypersectarian groups and the way, the way that they believe that there's some metaphysical truth. If you read enough Mao books, you'll self-help yourself. The same, this Ayn Rand, though, is that ideology is entirely constructed for that reason. Ayn Rand, as we kind of outlined at the beginning, had a kind of cult-like following and sort of, told a lot of people what they wanted to hear to provide some kind of intellectual justification for the particular set of social and economic relations that exist in the United States and benefit certain elements of society. So, so you have these people, people buying into this philosophy without really looking at it critically, because at the end of the day, if you're arguing about whether it's called the non-aggression principle or the non-initiation of violence principle, those two terms are the same term, right? But if you're going to be so pedantic, it is a kind of indication that you have this faith-like adherence to what Marxists might call idealism, in the sense that it isn't really a materialist based philosophy, but one that is based on these kind of abstract ideals.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also say that when he's rattling off the 5 areas of philosophy and what she thinks about them, again, I mean, I don't want to beat this metaphor to death, but it does really have a feeling of ritualistically saying all of the and then he was resurrected and all this
the catechism.
It's look, I'll give you an analogy. I can't remember which historian it was, but in Turkey before the Turkish Revolution and the secularization of the state, people would quote sayings of the Prophet and use Islamic justifications for certain policies and things. After the revolution, people began using quotes of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in exactly this, serving the exact same function to justify, policies and ideologies to, have this like great person saying things. So there is this kind of tendency to like what you guys in philosophy call the appeal to authority. Right. And, this is what like Ayn Rand said this. So.
Yeah. And I mean, because when he's rattling off all of the, these principles of objectivism, like so many of them are just completely vacuous, right? I mean, it's like, oh, we believe in objective reality, unlike everybody else, right? Who doesn't think that whatever they believe is objectively real? Like that's like kind of what it is to believe something is to think that it lines up with reality.
Yeah.
And oh, we believe that you should use reason, like as if this were anything that differentiated it. Like, all of the disagreements are about what reason tells you. Everybody at least thinks that they're, reasoning properly. Like this doesn't give you any information. You're just kind of ritualistically incanting like the rhetoric that was important to Ayn Rand, that, that like, cause she really emphasized, objective reality, this, logic, that, so it's like the more you say it, the more you feel like you're connected to that, even though like this is something, I mean, I said this in the first book, that I want to know, like what I want to see, the argument, right? People, because like there's a certain weird thing that people do when they encounter this, like Liz Brunig, who's somebody I like, but like she says she has a review of like this Ayn Rand book that was published posthumously, that a few years ago, where she says like, well, Ayn Rand, might have represented a certain kind of logic, but what about the logic of compassion and the logic of beauty? I'm like, no, slow down. What about the logic of logic, right? Like I want to know, I want to actually see the steps of this argument that's supposed to get you from A is A to we all need to accept unregulated free market capitalism, like really spell it out for me, how you get from, one of these to the other. Cause it's just so obvious that it's a front, right? I mean, like that this is ultimately like every other normative belief system. Like you can have logical inferences between the steps, but like, but it's ultimately going to bottom out in stuff that you value, goals that you care about. And the idea that like logic per se is commanding you to care about only your own individual, fulfillment and, not anybody else's, and to want, totally unregulated capitalism, like just makes absolutely no sense if you think about it for 10 seconds. But I mean, I think all of this sort of like wrapping yourself in this rhetorical cloak.
I mean, isn't that what it comes down to? I mean, again, I'm not super philosophically inclined, but this is logic and rationality as a posture and appearance, and there's nothing actually underneath that surface. It's merely a way to brand oneself or to create an appearance that you are somehow conforming to what it is to be logical. Because, for example, there's no reason that you can't be like completely having an emotional breakdown but making a perfectly logical argument. Those two things aren't contradictory at all, and you could be entirely cool and collected and calm. So people are kind of confusing one's appearance and posture for a deeper metaphysical truth, that if you say something slowly and calmly, what you are saying is logical, when there's actually nothing, there's no reason why that should be inherently the same.
Or just doing the Ben Shapiro thing and saying it quickly and confidently. And
then this is the same nonsense they do with all these conservatives talk about their reverence for the Western canon and enlightenment. But none of them have read any of the Western canon, and none of them know what the heck any of the Enlightenment philosophers say. It's merely just like a T-shirt that they wear to kind of take a kind of posture. It's really an abuse of the term logic and rationality.
No, exactly. Yeah.
It goes to show though, how far you can get by putting something on a flag, I mean, even, someone like Liz Brunig, who's, a smart person, but just read a paper or watch a movie with objectivists, and they'll tell you so many times that they're objective and they love logic, and you'll be like, all right, fine, you're the king of logic. Even if they even no way deserved it. And yeah, like Ben said, like maybe their theses flow logically from one another, but they're all reliant on some premise or on some political priorities that they're all
and even at that, right? Like, I actually don't think the theses flow that well.
They often still don't. Yeah, but if you have it actually, you can get people to accept.
Yeah, even within it, there are huge leaps, right? Like it doesn't, like the only thing that he really rattled off before he got to the part about how you should only follow your own self-interest that really had anything to do with justifying that was there's no other world, there's nothing supernatural, and this is what like Yarn Brooke kind of expressed, when I was arguing with him that, well, since there's no God and there's no afterlife, and you only have one life to live, so like you shouldn't sacrifice it, on the altar of anything else. It's like, okay, but again, like there's a is-ought problem there, because why should our conclusion from that be, therefore I'm only going to care about my own interests, right? Why shouldn't it be everybody else also has only one life to live, and like and if I could, and so everybody's interests have to be balanced out in a certain way. And for example, right, if somebody is not going to be able to go to college and pursue their particular dreams, because my taxes weren't raised by 1%, right? Like it's, given that all of us have only one life to live, like you could just as easily take that to, yeah, okay, for sure, you should institute that tax.
That's great. And yeah, I think that's great. There's one little side thing I want to mention here too, because I feel like it's innovative. He mentioned that, Ayn Rand, yes, she was on Social Security, and that's a smear against her. You're smearing her by doing that. She didn't have any money. She got on the social safety net, but that's a smear. So like, pretty lazy defense. What I love was the real argument was, that money was taken from her forcefully through taxes. So she's taking back money that had been looted from her. That is a great mode for argument. I'm going to do that all the time from now on. So the next time, anyone who was working for a company, embezzle all the time, because they're taking your labor value from you. Don't forget to embezzle and follow in Ayn Rand's footsteps. Yeah.
Well, it's also, it's funny because like literally that can't be a smear, because all Sam said was, did it upset you when you found this out? And like what he's saying is something
it's a fact.
It's a fact. It did happen. He's implying that this is in tension with her values, and that's arguable. But how could it be a smear? And then, yeah, like you said, his real defense of it is, well, she paid. You strip away all the libertarian rhetoric, and what the defense comes down to is she paid into the system, so it's cool for her to get out of it. But it's like, wait a second.
That's the premise of social safety net systems, though.
Right. Everybody pays into it, and everybody gets it when they need it. Like now we're getting somewhere.
So it's justified. Like,
yeah. So, but like everybody else.
Like every other human,
everybody else paid in too. So like, why, like they should be able to get it too, right? Like you can't, they can't all be parasites, but it's cool if Ayn does it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
All right.
The profit.
Yeah, exactly.
Period. Definitionally.
Okay, yeah, sure. If you want to define it that way, then yeah, she's against taxes.
Okay. All right. And let's just be clear here. You're not infertile. Because I sort of felt bad the other day. I was a little bit confused as to whether or not you could actually have children. But that's neither.
Yeah, I know that was. Yeah, I know that was
okay.
a funny little bit that people have made a lot of hay of.
I know it. It was funny. And we actually hold on, play the song for 1 second. Did you hear this? Because I want to get into I want to get into the political aspects of your philosophy that guides your life. Because I'm not really that terribly interested in philosophies. But play this. This is actually pretty funny.
This video is aimed at anyone who wants to learn more about infertility.
I was wondering if you're open to talking about your chat room policy.
That is in the bylaw.
Yes, please tell me what my chat room policy is.
It just frames silly comments.
YouTube chat.
So I block the people who are being rude and obnoxious to me.
All right, that's great. We should put a link to that song. It's pretty amazing.
It's called Dante's Infertile.
Yeah.
Kind of a good pun.
All right, but Dan, not Dante.
Yep.
Listen, I got to be honest with you. I'm not terribly interested in your philosophy, in philosophies, like, how this, deals with your life. Whether you believe in God or not believe in God or anything like that, that's all. None of that stuff really is implicated in the context of this show. But I'm more interested in what it means in terms of your politics. Now, you don't believe in taxes. You think taxes are immoral. And do you believe in, and you believe that, now you believe that society can do better if everyone pursues their own self-interest? Is that one of the tenets of your philosophy or worldview? Okay.
Yeah,
now let me ask you this.
Okay.
What do you do about antibiotics? Would you take antibiotics? Because, if everybody takes antibiotics, which is, for anything, which as an individual makes a lot of sense, because, if I have something that can be cleared up by antibiotics, I take it. If it doesn't clear it up, there's no really big harm in terms of the antibiotics, me taking them, as long as I take them as prescribed. However, when we get into the overuse of antibiotics, we are developing superorganisms or organisms that are mutating and making antibiotics less effective. So what do you do in that type of situation?
What do you do with antibiotics?
What do you do with the impetus to do what's in your rational self-interest, when in fact you pursuing your rational self-interest actually has a detriment to society?
Well, if you can show that it does physical harm to other people, then you could.
Well, it doesn't do physical harm to other people. It makes antibiotics less effective if you just take them all the time, if you're not in any way circumspect in the way that you take them. But it is in your own individual self-interest to have antibiotics. I imagine you wouldn't even allow for the licensing of people to prescribe drugs. Why would the state do that?
Why? A licensing.
Don't get caught up in the licensing. I'm just saying that the reason why we inhibit the use of antibiotics is not because it's not in the interest of any even individual at any given instance to take antibiotics. It's because we're afraid of antibiotics becoming ineffective.
Wait, so you're saying that if people take antibiotics,
if there's too much use of antibiotics, there is a great fear within the medical community, and there's a lot of indications that the overusage of antibiotics, on the whole, the collective overuse of antibiotics is making them less effective long term. And yet, as an individual, it makes sense for me to defer to antibiotics because there's no detriment to me as an individual to take these antibiotics.
Okay. So you're saying there's a conflict between what's good for the individual,
correct,
what's good for the society.
Yeah.
There are kinds of examples like that you could raise, and it's not always obvious.
Right. It's pretty obvious.
This one's obvious.
This one's super obvious. That's why I brought it up. It's super obvious.
So you think assuming this effect is real, that the solution that's obvious is what?
Well, the point is that it sort of puts to it illustrates that what might be good in the rational self-interest of the individual is not good in the interest of the collective and of society. And I wonder how someone like you deals with that reality.
Well, one thing I'm saying here is it's not always obvious what the solution is. I don't know what I would do personally about this if I were.
How does that square with your philosophy?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. This is something I would have to think about. You're talking about a medical situation. It's got these.
Well, I'm talking about the concept of. There's a lot of examples, frankly, where we can talk about what's good for the individual isn't necessarily good for society. One of those things actually came up in the Republican the Republican presidential primary last round, 2016, 2015. It was in the rational self-interest of all of those candidates to not attack Donald Trump early on because they didn't want to alienate Donald Trump's sizable support. However, they ended up all losing, and arguably the Republican Party ended up losing on some level, and certainly I think society did. Maybe you disagree, because they acted in their own rational self-interest. What I'm trying to do is give you, illustrations and examples of when your philosophy, and I know it's rather rigid, is wrong.
Yep.
Okay, well, I mean, if you can come up with a clear example,
I feel like I just gave you two.
Well, here's a question. Do you go to work?
I do.
Do you have a steady job?
Yes.
What happens if you don't go to work?
Then I will not get paid.
Right. And you need to be paid to exist in society. Is that correct?
Well, unless I file for some government program like a welfare that coerces people to support myself.
Can we just historicize that for a moment?
Wait, where are you going?
Right. But you are coerced to go to work, are you not, to continue to exist in society?
No, I choose to go to work.
But you choose to go to work, but you can't exist in society without going to work. How is that a choice?
I could exist in society without going for work. It might not be very good. I could live as a bum on the street and try to panhandle for money, and some people do that.
And a lot of them die.
And a lot of them, yeah, it's not a great way to live. I wouldn't choose it for myself.
You also could not
choose it
pay
for
taxes.
society?
You also could not pay taxes, as you say. You could be a conscientious non-taxpayer and go to prison and still live. Or you could live as a bum, as you'd say, on the street. So there are narrow exceptions to these coercive concepts that you're talking about. It's just which coercion makes sense for society, because you already are being coerced into a job.
No, I don't accept that.
Okay, caller, can I try? Caller, do you know what the word enclosure means?
I've heard of that. I had a debate with a communist on YouTube, and he talked about enclosures in England, and I said I didn't know much about that, but
it's not just in England. I mean, it's anywhere that you take land that was commonly held by the community and make it private property, a process that started basically like 400 years ago. Prior to that, you could just go into the woods and, be self-sufficient or be among your community. But in this epoch we live now, what Emma said is true. So you can't just opt out of this situation. It is a fundamental coercion, since basically we've privatized every way to live on your own self-sufficiently.
You think well, first of all, not everything is.
Have you tried hunting in America?
There's a ton of government. There's a ton of land that's owned by the governments. And capitalists are going after it over and over again in America, and a lot less in Europe, right? So but do you think that land should be held in common, or do you think that should be private property? In general, maybe there are some exceptions, like government land for government buildings, but the vast majority, at least, I think, should be private. Right. So then it's owned. So, for instance, if you wanted to go hunt for food, you would have to ask the landowner for permission. Yeah. If you're hunting on somebody's land, then yeah, I would think you need permission to hunt or do anything else on their land. So the self-sufficiency goes out the window unless you're basically on good with the local landowner. I mean, you can rent from somebody. I don't know. So are you thinking self-sufficient?
Well, no, I think the point is he's saying you have this option of becoming a bum. But I mean, if we lived in the world that you wanted to live, there would be no place where you were allowed to live as what you call a bum. Right? In your worldview, there are no public streets. There are no public sidewalks. There's only we'll make allowances for governmental buildings. But how do you, in your worldview, where it's not coercive for you to have a job, how do you exist? Because you walk on that private property, dude, and you don't have a place to live or to be, I'm going to say get out.
I don't think it's that hard to support yourself. You work at jobs, you pay some.
Well, no. We're not talking about hard. We're not talking about hard. We're talking about because you're talking about a philosophy, right? Like, I mean, this is why I don't subscribe to some type of like, principles that I have to, that provide answers for me in every situation, like ostensibly objectivism does. But you do. And your philosophy is that, I mean, you just said dictates to you that having to work is not coercive anyway. And we said, well, how is that the case? If you want to live in society, you need to work. And it's like, no, I could choose to live as a bum, you said, and hang out. And I'm suggesting to you that if the other part of your philosophy, which was that we should only have private property, short of maybe a government owning a place for their building, my question to you would be like, whose private property are you going to be able to trespass upon in your life as a guy who doesn't make money in this society? Like, where are you going to sleep at night, dude?
Yeah, this is nice. So I guess my first thing to throw to you guys would be that I think that the caller Dan Norden, we actually have his. This is Gene found his YouTube page, which is called the Selfishness Project. The Selfishness Project. Like he wants to kind of have it both ways here, because the really consistent libertarian thing is saying that if you're going to starve to death for not accepting a job, for not like being willing to go to work for a capitalist, then that's still not coercive, because they did, as long as you didn't already have food and they stole it from you. If it's just society is set up in such a way that you have to either, go to work for a capitalist or starve, that there's nothing coercive about it. But even Dan, even Selfishness Project Dan is not quite willing to go there. Like, he kind of realizes that, no, that sounds pretty coercive. So he's, well, you could be a bum and live on the streets, which I think then sets up Sam to just say, well, hold up. So you think there should be public streets, or these private streets, if they're private streets, why is somebody going to let you, why is the street owner just going to let you live there?
Well, the argument falls to pieces under the slightest push, because it's based on a really artificial division between government oppression and private oppression. Like, private oppression doesn't exist, but there's this thing called government oppression, which exists, and we can make this kind of distinction. Because, at the end of the day, when you talk to Americans and you ask them, look, who is the real person who has control over your life? Is it the government, or is it your boss at McDonald's, who can tell you what to wear, who can tell you how to cut your hair, who can tell you what time you wake up in the morning, who can tell you when you can eat, who can tell you when you can go pee in a bottle? Who has that thing? And the second thing, and perhaps Rob can speak to us this a little bit more, under capitalism, and there is a requirement that a certain proportion of the labor force must be pauperized. Marx called it the reserve army of labor. Mm-hmm. Today we call it the natural rate of unemployment, or the non-cyclical rate of unemployment, where you have, in order to avoid inflation, those who control the levers of power in capitalist society, in fact, create structural unemployment for the system to think. So you don't actually have a choice whether you have a job. You may actually, in certain circumstances, have no choice about whether you have a job or not. And I can't imagine a libertarian-run economic system would somehow address that problem. I don't know. What would people say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, man. And yeah, with liberal capitalism, they try to solve that a little bit with the social safety net and your Social Security and Medicare, which when you do it, it's terrible. When that's required, it's terrible. But if you enroll in it because you need a social safety net, like Ayn Rand did when her writing right-wing screenplays wasn't paying the bills, it's, well, I paid into this, so I'm looting back. Like, we're all doing that. Like, you're not being a rebel. You're participating in the normal model for a social safety net system where we pay into it when we're healthy and pay out of it when we need it. You daffy goofballs. But I really appreciate it here. And sort of, I'm finding like a great way to sort of recognize that fundamental coercion in the marketplace, and especially the labor market specifically, that Emma brought up. Oh, God. I guess it's the producer here, the off-screen voice.
Yeah,
we all heard that, right? That wasn't just me. And making the point of the enclosure movements. Like, to me, that's a really great tool for arguing with idiots, because it's this major historical event. So right away, it has the two values of like being the origin story of capitalism to a big extent is the enclosure movement, especially like the labor market part of it, like for sure there. But then additionally, it's history, so no one will know it.
Like you would not be able to get people during the Industrial Revolution, like, working for like 16 hours a day. Remember, 12 hours was like a big reform that had to be fought for.
That's right.
In these like noisy, dangerous, factories that like what William Blake famously called his poem Jerusalem dark satanic mills.
Yeah,
right?
and you're an independent farmer or a craftsman. Like, why would you go over to this terrible existence being in a labor market where you're just working for whatever value you can get that day, and you never know if you have a job the next day? It's like a terrible idea. That's why I'm clinging to my cat here for security. But what's great is like that. I just like to refer back to that so much. I love that the producer brought it up, because it's it's history. So not only does it establish all this stuff, but also thanks, Tom. I appreciate that, Matt Lech. That's good. It's history, so no one knows it, and you can reliably get idiots on their back foot because they are not going to know more than a sentence or two at best. I remember a while ago, some of us on Left Titter were having a fun chuckle at the expense of one of the newer right-wing media idiots, Tim Pool, who is one of the greatest nitwits on the internet, I think I would say. And he had the point about, this is a while ago and you don't remember these things, so forgive me, but he was talking about the French Revolution and why did all these peasants and penniless proletarians say hello? Say hello. Hello. Why did all these proletarians have to rise up and do a big dumb revolution and make all these sacrifices and have all this death and torture? Why didn't this is this guy who goes on Fox and he said, like, why didn't they just go into the woods and like live in the woods and like do what they do in movies where you go into the woods and you have a crossbow and you shoot a bird and you're cooking it and a hot woman comes and then you fuck? Like, why don't you just do that? He's new to my awareness of idiots anyway. So it's kind of tough, like these guys don't know anything about these movements. Like that was the point of the enclosure movement, was to make that kind of strategy impossible for people, right? So just by bringing it up, like Mr. Lech, the producer there did, I think is a great move that people should turn to. Like that can be better than doing what Emma did and just bringing up like how unfair it is, because the origin always makes things clearer, That's why they keep doing Batman's origin again. This is my tortoiseshell cat. She's very beautiful. Her adoption name was Lilith, but I renamed her Thrillith to be cooler.
Nice.
Yeah.
I don't.
I forgot about Rave Dubin. Okay, I accept that correction.
I do like that the caller says that he's only ever heard of the enclosures because he debated a communist on YouTube and they brought it up.
Well, this is a critical point because also the libertarian notion of society is entirely ahistorical. Firstly, that fantasy can only be conceived of in an advanced industrial country. Going back to my point that like you go to a developing country, people think this idea is silly, right? Number two, as Rob points out, it has to base itself on ignoring the fact for the majority of recorded human history, large portions of the globe were either unclaimed by anybody or held by segmented communal groups, whether that's villages, tribes, or what have you. There was no conception of private property across large parts of the globe, frankly, right down to the 20th century. So it's like based on a This is a lot of stuff that I see actually with this kind of like right-wing dude bro kind of people, is like they think they're having profound thoughts, but it's basically because they don't know anything about history, and they're just like sitting there smoking weed, going like, "Bro, what if we're all like individuals?"
Well, that would definitely be. I don't know about Dan, but definitely that applies to Tim Pool.
Oh yeah,
as somebody who, has not so much recently, but somebody who spent clocked in some serious time with very high people. That guy strikes me as being very high, like kind of all the time.
Yeah, that guy's a pothead, and I am one too. That's how I know the signs.
Yeah. It just like that. That is always very much the vibe that he gets off. But yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, Matt Leck, by the way, like the hard CH, but yeah, I mean, I think this is the sort of core point that Michael was making, throughout against, his book Against the Web. One of the big themes of that book is that what reactionaries always do, the sort of core of it is that they want to either naturalize or mythologize, historic, like unjust institutions, say either like, the gods ordained this, or, it's just sort of part of, the fabric of, of nature, because what they want to avoid doing at all costs, and this is what, Jane's point is historicizing it, saying, oh, this arose under certain historical circumstances, which then, raises the uncomfortable for them possibility that in other historical circumstances in the future, people could just decide to do away with them, at least there could be conjecture, there could be combinations of circumstances in the future where that could be possible.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. Yeah, I don't know. The sock puppet account, who's a good commenter, says Tim is not mellow at all. I don't know. I disagree. The times like maybe he's maybe he's got intense moments. Like the clips I tend to see him, he strikes me as sort of like it's like Joe Rogan, right? Like I'm soft on Joe Rogan, although obviously I'm not crazy about the last kind of year of his opinions, to put it mildly, especially on vaccines and stuff. But but like I have a hard time getting mad at him, like because he just kind of strikes me as a certain kind of guy who likes to go to the gym and lift and smoke weed and talk about aliens, and it's hard to hate that guy. But but Tim Pool sort of strikes me as the much more politically evil version of that.
Yeah, in another world, he could have been a Felix Biederman or something,
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It could have, it's just a waste. You hate to see waste.
Yeah, exactly.
Joe Rogan's a kind of everyman, isn't he? He's like, he is really like, Tim Pool is more, is more like, I think, intellectually dishonest. I think Joe Rogan is just like, he's just literally a guy who's like takes maybe he's like the guy who takes roids at the gym. I'm not saying Joe Rogan takes roids at the gym, but he's like
no, but that's the vibe, right? That he gives off. And yeah, I mean, I actually do think this is something I talked about in the last book, and Michael and I wrote an article about it for Jacobin when like Rogan sort of endorsed Bernie in 2020, that like there is something very everymanish about him, which is to say that mostly that he's incredibly confused about politics, which is like much more common in the general population than like actually having a coherent worldview one way or the other, right? Like most people don't pay that much attention because
they've got better things to do.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, so like,
they have politics are a drag.
Yeah. So like, they might, pay a little bit of attention. They have some political impulses. They have some political reactions to things, but they don't spend enough time thinking about it for it really to like cohere into a consistent worldview. So like, so he can, and like Rogan, even though obviously he doesn't have the sort of economic pressures that, that like cause so many people not to have time to think that much about this stuff. He has, but like he ultimately, he's at least as interested in psychedelics and MMA and half a dozen other, aliens, as all these other subjects as he is in politics. So it's like, yeah, he can kind of like hear, Jordan Peterson can rant at him about, the post-modern neo-Marxists, and, Joe will just kind of nod along, although he did push back a little bit when Peterson told him that he had this about his reaction to drinking cider, but which, if you haven't seen that video, you should. It's very funny. But but like he'll mostly nod along to Peterson's insane view of the world, but then Bernie Sanders or Cornel West goes on the show, and and he's like, oh yeah, dude, good point, right? Like that, and I don't think he's faking it either. Like, I think he's just kind of impressionable, and these all actually do sound like good points to him.
Yeah, like Rogan is what happens when you have half of your brain working properly, because he's great on being open-minded, bad at critical thinking. So anyone can come in his door and anyone can make a pitch, and he'll listen with an open mind, but he doesn't have any of that ability to screen out goofy bullshit from sensible. But that is like, that's a great point, which Jay said earlier, because he is like the ultimate, in a way, the ultimate American in media, because he has no coherence, completely a la carte selection of political and social ideas. That's how Americans are, like with their religion, with their politics, completely goofy diametric ideas that don't fit together at all, and people will happily hold them both in their heads and take them to the grave. That's every man in America.
And that's the problem, I think, that certain people on the left have, is that they just cannot, they unlike, people criticize Ben for like going on other platforms to try and convince people. And it's like, nobody cares about your like hypersectarianism, or your like moralism. Like the left is so insular in the United States. There's no left, right? There's just like a couple of cliques of people on Twitter who like to, be self-congratulatory about how morally superior they are to everybody else. And, maybe they are morally correct. Maybe, people are bad, have bad opinions and have like negative attitudes towards certain social groups. But you have to like, at the end of the day, you have to persuade people. And, it's like when these people say, it's not my job to.
No, it literally is your job.
It literally is your job to persuade
people.
Like
insofar as you consider yourself a useful participant in any effort to change the world for the better.
Yeah,
because the whole job is to persuade, is to educate people. That's the phrase, right? It's not my job to educate people.
And like you can't obviously persuade everybody, but like the vast majority of Americans are not benefiting from the economic system, or at least can be persuaded that, certain aspects of the economic system and material conditions that they live in are damaging to them. But like, if you're just going to lead with kind of graduate school, postmodern theory discourse, and then tell everybody how bad they are, it's just going to be like completely politically counterproductive, and you're going to end up creating a reaction and then feeling like, look, the people are bad anyway, because that's what a lot of this discourse that goes about. It's like, these people are unredeemable. Well, if we're unredeemable, just give up politics, go live in, like, what's the point of politics if they're irredeemable? You have this, it's pretty bizarre. You have this kind of centrist wing of the Democratic Party, which believes that there's no such thing as persuasion, and you just have to go with what the people want. But that's precisely the same view as certain elements of the so-called radical left, which believe that nobody can actually be changed or persuaded. Like, who are they even fighting for?
Yeah, no, exactly. That, unfortunately right now, most people, even though they, most people's interests would definitely be served by the things the left wants, and there are certain reforms that, that are popular, although most people who tell pollsters they like them don't really believe they can happen, so they don't get upset when they don't.
Right.
They just, what they mean is, oh yeah, I guess that would be nice, right? Also, if that happened.
I would add I would add to this, and I think this is a big problem of progressives on the left. A lot of people, seem to think that they're like, our policies are popular. Everybody likes Medicare for all. Everybody likes, free college. And I don't think that's true.
I definitely don't think that's true.
I think people might, in theory, think that's something in it. Like if you said, do you think everybody should have healthcare? They'll say yes. But if you actually get down to concrete proposals and how that would look, suddenly they become like far more conservative, especially if they have like healthcare, have their own insurance and things like that. I think it's delusional for the left to believe that the battle of ideas on Medicare for all has been won when it clearly has not.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best analogy I heard about this was from Natalie Scher, writes for Jackman in the New Republic. We were talking about, the Medicare for all polls, and most people, if a pollster just calls them up and says, hey, would you like it if the government, paid for your health care, then you never had to deal with Blue Cross Blue Shield again? Most people would be like, yeah, that sounds great, right? Sure, I want that. But then you have these framing effects where basically if you ask it in a way that like front loads, like that frames it in a certain way, it's taking away, private health insurance or whatever, right? Like, basically if you give people the centrist or right-wing talking points about it, those numbers really dip. And Natalie's metaphor is it's like, this is the difference between somebody who in a union organizing drive would be maybe willing to like sign a card, right? If like you have a conversation with them and you kind of give them a union card, and then if enough people sign the card, you get the certification vote. But just being willing to sign the card, that's a relatively shallow level of support. But then when you get like the month of the company scaremongering about it, and then you actually have the union certification election, there's a huge difference between just being willing to sign the card and actually being committed enough to the union that you stick to your guns in those circumstances. And I think at best, with this majority support, we're at the willing to sign the card level. And I also think that even to the extent that this really shows that we have, again, I agree with you. I don't think we've won the battle of ideas there, but even to the extent that we have, that's still a long way from getting to the point where people are really going to, go to bat for it, or even really that they're going to change their voting behavior based on it, because most people who like the idea don't think it's ever going to happen. They think it's a pleasant pipe dream, right? It's like, oh yeah, that would be great if it ever happened. But if you don't believe that something is really going to happen, then you don't get mad when politicians don't implement it because you never thought they would.
And people might have different priorities, right? For example, someone you might be able to convince. I've spoken to conservatives here in Missouri who you can like say, yeah, like rationally, they're like, yeah, probably even from a capitalist perspective, it would be good to have universal healthcare. I'm a small business owner. I don't really want to have to pay these insurance things. I get it. But I don't want abortion. And I'm not going to vote for Democrats because like abortion is child murder. You know what I mean? So like people also have like people might be in favor of certain policies, but they might not be political priorities. And there are a whole, and because American politics is fundamentally fought in the arena of culture wars, these cultural issues will, eclipse the salience of economic issues because Democrats don't really offer anything. All there is the culture war. And so people will vote based on that culture war.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, sure. I mean, look, obviously the whole task of the left is to find ways to change the subject back to the class war, and to get people to believe that stuff like Medicare for all actually might happen, that these are achievable goals, at which point, I think have people voting much less based on, Democrats want to murder babies or whatever. And start to be like, I want people to at least have a real conflict. People who have reactionary social values, I want to at least make them have to pick between those values and their economic interests. Right now, they don't really feel like they have to pick because they think that the culture war stuff is what's actually at issue, and that the economic stuff they don't really believe is going to happen, because why would they? Their entire experience of politics is that nothing much ever changes on that level of like distribution of resources and anything that would really have an effect on their lives. That politicians talk a good game, but like, you kind of know none of that's going to happen. Barack Obama gives some speech in 2008, where he talks about, fundamentally changing society, which, conservatives like lost their shit about for like the next 10 years because they see he said it, he admitted it, right? He wants to fundamentally change everything. Also I don't think most Democratic voters got mad at him when nothing fundamentally changed, because they never thought it would.
And it's like Trump, like people go on about how bad Trump was. I mean, Trump was bad for certain groups of people, right? If you're a dreamer, if you're a trans person, but that's not the vast majority of Americans' experience. The vast majority of Americans' experience was like the economy was doing fine until COVID. Trump said some mean stuff. And anyway, a lot of the policies that affect their day-to-day life are executed by state governments. So like, as much as there was liberal hysteria around like Trump being the worst president ever, and he was a terrible president, like in actually affecting the day-to-day lives of Americans, unless you were in one of those groups that were targeted, it was, and let's point out, even for the vast majority of, let's say, African Americans, cops were murdering people, doing extrajudicial killings under Obama, so like, it's not that George Floyd wasn't like a huge radical change in policing. So for the majority of Americans, politics seems pretty irrelevant. Whether so it becomes down to like a dispositional debate. Yeah. Like my hot take, and tell me if I'm wrong on this. Trump is merely the conservative Obama. It's like it was all about disposition.
I think that's mostly true. I think that the place where it might break down a little bit is that the COVID response was so catastrophically bad that I think if you're just looking at the first 3 years of Trump, I don't think it's really like.
Do you think Ted Cruz would have done a better job, though? I mean, like a significantly better job than Trump? Do you think
I don't know how significantly. I actually do think that like, it would be hard to have done much worse than Trump.
Yeah, the difference would be that anyone who is a conventional piece of garbage Republican, certainly including Cruz, would say, this is a war. I'm a wartime president now. People will accept this shit if I make it about a war and I'm a wartime leader. Any Republican other than Trump would have had the dumb political instincts to 9/11 it.
Yeah. I don't know if that's true.
I think it is possible that they would have at least realized that there was a kind of pragmatic capitalist class self-interest.
Yeah, this is killing the market. It's going to kill my reelection. They would have seen a little. I think it would have been a little more logical. Get money to these state governments and shit.
I think there may have been like a little bit more emphasis on masks, but I think the Republican base has got so polarized now. Yeah. I think they would have had to make these kind of concessions to that base, because Trump's skill was riding the wave of what the Republican he was a product and a symptom of the sort of.
No, I think that's largely true, but also I think that like the GOP did to a pretty remarkable extent become a Donald Trump cult of personality over the course of the last 4 years, that Trump could say anything. And look, it's like what he said in 2016. He could shoot a guy, out in broad daylight and nobody would care. That like a lot of, the Republican Party at their convention in 2020, they decided not to adopt a platform. Mm-hmm. Their platform was just going to be whatever Trump does, is good with us. So, I do agree. All of which is just to say that I think if Trump had reacted to COVID differently, I think the base would have, I think it would be really, obviously it's unknowable at some level, mm-hmm. right? But I suspect that a lot of the Republican base would have just gone with whatever he did. right? That like I was actually talking about this last night. Like the really fascinating thing, if you had the Rick and Morty device where you could watch TV from other dimensions, and you could see, like how this was played out, the 24-hour cable news networks in the other dimensions, would be if Trump had kind of done what Rob thought that Cruz would do, and sort of treated it like he was Bush on 9/11. If he had done that, I think a lot of ultra conservatives would have been, I'm a patriot. I'm gonna go with the president, and I suspect we would have gotten a lot of liberal anti-maskers.
Maybe interesting.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think
I don't know.
My pushback would be that you might have ended up with the good czar syndrome, where like they'd be like, Trump's just saying this because they make him say it, right? But because these guys will believe what they want now. Trump can say whatever he likes. They will interpret it and be like, he's only saying this because he has to say this, right? He doesn't really mean it, because that was one of the weird tendencies of the Trump era, was that there would be times where his base would ignore what Trump was saying, but like their justification for ignoring it was that like, well, we know he doesn't really mean it. It's really scary political moment in that sense.
Yeah, but I mean, I also think look, obviously, I'm not saying I don't have views about these things. I do. I mean, I think you should I think even now, if you're in like a really crowded place, like you should wear a mask, and clearly you should get vaccinated, and these are obviously like good, necessary public health things. But like the way that the mask thing played out just shows, I think, how the culture war just eats everything, right? That became a way of signaling one way or the other, tribal affiliation. And I think that even though I do agree with some of what you're saying, Gene, that like some of that support for Medicare for all doesn't necessarily go as deep as we wish it would. There's definitely more work to be done in terms of educating. Like a lot of Americans are very confused about what the difference is between Medicare for all and public option, for example.
Right.
I think that's all true, but also I think that like to the extent that we could shift the subject from, are you mad at people who don't wear masks, or are you mad at people who want you to wear a mask, to should everybody have health care, that I think that that's just terrain that the left is going to do much better on, right? Because most people, I mean, look, even Charlie Kirk, right? I was very recently in his presence, and he even he, right, is doing this weird rebranding that they're all kind of doing now, that he's a populist now, and what that means is very unclear, but Charlie Kirk, Josh Hawley, J.D. Vance, even Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, who one would think are like the most established Republicans ever, and even somebody like Charlie Kirk, who's very obviously just a Reaganite, like they all make a big point of saying they're populist. They use corporate as an insult.
Right.
Like I've seen Ted Cruz like use the phrase the corporate media, like he's a guest on Democracy Now! In 2005. Like it just blows my mind to see that. But like why are they all like it's meaningless on a policy level. They don't support anything that would actually benefit working class people in any way. But I think the fact that they feel the need to make the rhetorical shift says something about the way that they feel the terrain shifted, that there is even, it's incoherent, like a lot of times, like the target's very unclear, but like there is a lot of anger floating around right now. And there is definitely a widespread sense that some sort of elite somewhere is screwing you over. And so they're trying to make a play to appeal to that. But what they always want to do is they want to translate it into their cultural preoccupations. They'll use these sneaky phrases like woke corporations, right, or even woke capital. I mean, it's obvious that the part they object to isn't the capital part, it's the woke part, but like putting it together that way very purposely conflates the issues. Like, whereas like the more we could focus on, okay, but do you want everybody to have health care or not? I think the better we do, right? I mean, like even somebody like Kirk, even though he doesn't support any changes to the status quo pretty much that would actually, make anything more egalitarian, like he's not like, he'll soften it a little bit because I think he knows, that on some level that his audience isn't going to go for the super strident, like Dan, whatever his last name is, Dan Norden thing, right? Where you say, no, you could just go out and, if you don't like it, you can live on the streets, you'll be fine.
You can tell that they've rebranded everything, right? Like they've rebranded deregulation to deconstructing the administrative state.
Yes,
it's like the same thing. Right?
I don't think you're fooling anybody. And plus, like Dan said, it's easy for someone like Dan to say, well, just go live on the streets instead. Of course, it's easy for him to say that. He doesn't have a family. He's infertile. So it's easy for him to pull up stakes, live under a bridge. Sure, of course, he can do that. But what about the rest of us?
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Great, rich fertility. How are we supposed to live?
Exactly. Right. No question. Kirk's line is that he says, well, we could have a social safety net. I just don't want it to turn into a hammock, which somebody actually pointed out when we played the debate on Monday that just visually that metaphor doesn't really work because safety nets are standardly a lot bigger than hammocks. Like it wouldn't do much good if it was as small as a hammock. But of course, Dan Norden of the Selfishness Project doesn't even want us, no hammock, no net, no nothing. Like if you should, you need to either live in the woods if you can find some non-private woods. Although he also thinks the woods should be private, or you should find an employer who's willing to hire you, and that's that. So let's watch the last piece of this.
Well, I mean, you're putting yourself in that problem.
No. You're putting yourself in that property. You're that problem. You're saying that there is an option to not working and to not getting government largesse. And what is that option in which you can survive?
You choose to work, so you don't.
No. Listen.
But if
you're avoiding the question. I'm saying it's a choice. It's a free choice, right? So there must be an option.
Yeah.
What's the option to not working in the society, in particularly the society that you envision, where everything is owned privately? You tell me what you, Dan, fertile or not, is going to do. You have made the choice to not work, to not earn any money in society. You've also, because of your philosophy, said that the government should not be providing any help to you, Dan. So, Dan, You have this free choice. What's the choice? Talk to me about the choice that you choose not to work. What happens then?
Well, assuming I make that bad choice, I don't know why I would do that, but if I make that choice...
Well, because you can, because of freedom.
You're not being coerced.
Freedom, right?
Yeah, if I stupidly make the choice not to work, stupidly make the choice not to work,
right,
then I would have to rely on charity.
Whoa, wait. No, let's talk about the day you get knocked out of your apartment, right? You can't pay your rent on your apartment. Where do you go?
I don't know. Maybe I go to a park or something.
Whoa. A public park? Dude, wait. Dude, we're living in Dan's world. There are no public parks.
Yeah, maybe in Dan's world, we would create a park for people exactly in the kind of situation.
Who's we? Wait. We?
Yeah.
Wait.
Maybe some...
We?
Anybody.
We?
Say you're some capitalist businessman and you don't want to have dead or sick poor people just going at random places. So you create...
No, wait. Who's done that? Who's ever done that? Well, we're not going to do that. You can't rely on somebody's largesse.
We have homeless people now.
I want to know. Yeah, exactly. Wait, what do you mean? We? Dan, what do you do? You've been kicked out of your apartment. Where do you go?
look, if I were running the show.
No, Dan, you're not running the show. You simply made the free choice. You can say it's smart or not smart. Well, that's debatable, but you made the free choice to not work because work is not coercive in our society. According to you, you don't need money. You can choose to do something else. You've been kicked out of your apartment because your landlord has said you haven't paid rent. Where do you go? You step out that door. Where do you go?
You're saying every inch of the earth is owned by someone.
You just said to me, Dan, you don't believe in public property. You believe that it should be privatized. So where do you go?
All right, let me see if I can think this through. So I'm kicked out of my apartment, and
this is a good stonewalling technique.
Any other street I walk on, oh, I hear the music.
Yep. It's like the game show. You're thinking you get time to think, choose door number 1, door number 2 type of thing. I'm just trying to fill time.
So much would be different. There would be so much different in this world that I don't know what all the options would be. I would assume that the free market would have evolved a mechanism by this time to handle the kind of,
well, that's a hell of an assumption.
Well, wait a second. I'm just curious what that evolution would look like. The free market would be like incinerator. Like maybe we get if you can't pay your rent and you got to step out, we're not going to allow you to step on. You're not walking on my sidewalk.
Into the fire pit.
Historically,
that's the cheapest way to do it.
The solution is penal colony.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I would put you in a labor camp, like a privatized one, of course, or maybe the incinerator. Maybe I get a contract from somebody from the government, but there's that nasty government again. I guess the point is that I'm trying to make here, and the reason why you can't come up with this answer is either the need for money is coercive in our society, or the world in which you envision is not real or possible. You are.
So I just have to stop here because this is going to seem like a huge digression, but just give me 30 seconds here to lay it out. There's this, there's this classical objection to Kantian moral philosophy, where Kant says that you have to follow the categorical imperative no matter what, that consequences don't matter, only this moral principle matters. And one of the clearest entailments of the categorical imperative is that you're not allowed to tell lies. And so there's this French philosopher, who lived at the same time as Kant, Benjamin Constant, who has this, classic objection, the murder at the door objection. Like what if somebody's, your friend is hanging out in your living room and, somebody knocks on the door and they're like holding a bloody axe and, they demand to know if you know where the guy is. Like, do you really have to tell the truth in that circumstance, right? Like surely the morally right thing to do is to lie to the axe murderer. And lots of people have thought that this showed that this isn't really an absolute obligation to do this. So there's this Catholic philosopher in the 20th century, Peter Geach, who has my all-time favorite bullshit solution to this, which is to say, well, okay, we can come up with, internally consistent scenarios, I guess, where different moral, principles would come into conflict, but God in his benevolence would not allow that conflict to happen. So don't worry about it. Right. And when Dan says, well, I assume the free market would evolve some sort of solution to this, that's all I can think of, that this is the Peter Geach solution to the murder at the door problem. Except that the Geach one makes more sense on its own terms because God is all powerful and benevolent, the free market isn't supposed to be omniscient and omnipotent. I don't know what exactly the basis is for believing that it's just going to evolve a solution to this problem.
Well, it's functionally supernatural in the libertarian worldview. It's like they might say that they don't believe in sort of metaphysics and magic and superstition, but in their worldview, the free market is like some magical force. They just don't call it a magical force.
It's true. And the ultimate way to see that, what you guys are saying is, if you ever say to them, all right, well, suppose I'm a working person and I, get pregnant or I get really sick or I get hit by a car and I don't have much money. I don't have any insurance. Like, how am I supposed to get by? What if all my friends are too poor to support me and their houses are full, which is common when you're poor? Like, what am I supposed to do then? It's like, oh, well, that creates they'll create a new need, and that should be able to happen. So there'll be some private safety net. What I always want to say is, like, well, what about before we had what about before we had Social Security? What did people evolve then? Oh, there's fucking nothing. Like, no one wants to remember that before we had some awful government program to put out our fires or give pensions to poor people, it wasn't that there were markets solving those things. They just went fucking unsolved, and the rivers were on fire, and you had elderly people begging.
Right.
You fucking inbred idiots. Like, it's worse than not knowing even like the enclosure stuff, which I was bitching about earlier. They don't know shit that was happening 80 years ago. Like, it's just so as it gets later in the day, it gets harder for me to take this stuff.
And it's also the fact that, like, capitalism is driven by profit, but profit doesn't have anything necessarily to do with need, because there are a whole bunch of things in society where you can say that there's a substantial need, but they're not necessarily profitable. And how resources are allocated are according to profitability. So, for example, if you're a computer technician, and I've said this before, but if you're a computer technician in a top university, are you going to go work on something that helps humanity, or are you going to work on an app that helps you have random hookup toilet sex slightly faster? Well, it's going to be the latter because it's more profitable, but it doesn't mean that there's like a greater need for it. And just because something is profitable doesn't mean it's like good. Crack cocaine is super profitable. If we made that legal, heroin would be like, that would be the business to be in, right?
Oh yeah.
But that doesn't make it something positive we want in society. Well, libertarians famously, are into like heroin.
I mean, you could tell that this is that heroin is insanely profitable because the entrepreneurs who specialize in it are comfortable with a decent chunk of their customer base dying on a regular basis, and it's not a big concern. Whatever, more where that came from.
Exactly.
I think I mean, like, and part of what you're pointing to, Gene, I mean, this is what Sam was trying to bring out earlier with the stuff about antibiotics and the Republican primary and all of that stuff, which is something that I've got to say, in my experience, libertarians in general struggle with, which is collective action problems. That it's entirely possible for some, you to have like real life prisoner's dilemma situations where you have all of the people involved in some situation, if they're only pursuing their individual best interests, will end up doing things that will cumulatively have the effect of making it worse for everybody. Like, it's just bizarre to rule that out a priori and say that definitely can't happen.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense because, of course, that worldview is based on the notion that there's such thing as like individual. This individual human is like an absolute unit, but there's no such thing as an individual human. Like, the biggest torture you could do to someone is to put them in solitary isolation. Yeah, and babies can't survive by themselves. Like the other day, people were going. There was in Wisconsin, they voted against free school meals for children. Because it was like they didn't want children teaching about free school meals. It's like, I have a 2-year-old. He doesn't pay for his meals. He's eating meals off me. All kids live off free meals. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive. You know what I mean? It's like utterly. It's an utterly. Not only is it ahistorical, it fundamentally misunderstands humans. Just because you feel and exist as an individual, we exist as a species and we exist as a society, and we cannot function. Otherwise, I mean, maybe there's some weird, like, individuals who can try and like live off in the woods, but for the majority of humans, we need contact and we must function together in the society. And so, like, the question is not about individuals, but how do we organize the society within which we live?
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's a sense in which you could say, sure, that like individual people, are going to be the unit of concern, which I think is like, there's some deep sense in which that's right. And I mean, not like this is what's wrong with like, this is what's wrong with nationalism, right? The idea that there's, like if you're like Alexander Dugin, and you think, we watched him a couple of debate breakdowns ago, and you think that there's this entity that's the Russian nation that, that the glory of which like involves sacrificing, like anything that would actually, the actual interests of like particular human beings within it, right? He says that, the person no more has rights against the society than your lib has rights against you. Okay, that's an insane view. Yeah. But also, if we're talking about what the actual interests of individual humans are, which, sorry, I do think have to be balanced against each other. Other people count too. Like the actual interests of individual human beings are completely interdependent all the time, right? Like, as you say, solitary confinement is one of the most effective forms of torture. Like obviously we're going to depend on each other for all of our needs all the time, so, even if we did have non-enclosed woods that you could go live in and hunt, that's Hobbes is not wrong, right? Life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Like you're way better off being in a society where you can meet your needs interdependently, and you're even better off than that, living in a society where, people have some sort of, collective democratic control over the distribution of resources. Anyway, let's, I think we've got like 5 minutes left of the actual thing. So let's watch that.
Why imagining are you asking about this really weird case? I'm curious. It's not going to be.
It's just the one that just happened. It was just literally the one that just sort of we walked into, because we could have had this conversation about, and it could have been 20 other examples.
Because you said work isn't coercive, and you're saying taxes are coercive, but work is not. That's why we're in this hypothetical right now.
Well, let me ask you about this. If you're alone on an island, you have to work to survive, right?
What?
If you're alone on an island, do you have to work to survive?
Do I have to work to survive? I would.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm alone on the island, guess what? I brought also a bunch of food and a bunch of other stuff too.
Well, how about if there's two people on the island? Does one own it and the other works for the person? Like
No. Hold on. You're getting ahead of it.
Okay, sorry.
You're alone on the island.
Yeah.
Do you have to work to survive?
I would imagine.
Yeah, I probably have to do some fishing, maybe build some shelter.
Okay. Are you being coerced?
No.
Okay, so just because you have to work to survive doesn't mean you're being coerced.
Well, I don't have to earn any money.
Yeah, exactly. You're not making any money. You're not earning a wage from a capitalist.
I don't earn any money. And also, you know what doesn't exist on that island?
Property.
Private property.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody owns that island.
Nobody has it.
It's all public property.
Now, if it's all private property and I don't have money, I'd probably die.
Money is irrelevant on the island.
Oh, well, so is it property. Okay, I'll tell you what, dude. If you eliminate private property, I will have no issue with people working to survive.
Yeah, work is good. Work for capitalists, especially when it's compelled by the state powers, is not. It's a different thing.
So if you're alone on the island and you have to work to survive, you're not going to be as well off as if there were someone there who could be your employer and offer you a job. We've already got a system that's established.
What?
You can just easily walk into that and earn a wage.
Wait a second. I'm alone on the island, but there's a boss there?
No,
determine my wage?
Your life would be much easier if there were an employer to help you out.
You know what would be even more?
Wait a second.
That's some punk energy, dude.
If I'm alone, wait. You're saying my life on the island would be easier if I was working for an employer on the island alone.
How much do you love your boss, Dan?
Can we just talk about Robinson Crusoe for a second? Like, if there was another person on the island, okay, I don't buy that it'd be more helpful if he was a boss. But if he was willing to work for you for no wage, that would be ultra helpful, actually, and maybe more historically accurate.
But he wouldn't be a boss.
A random boss just there to tell you what to do and how much you get for how much work you did? That would not be helpful. A boss that just... Is it the idea that the boss just knows productivity so well that he can teach you exactly the way to build the hut and fish for fish? Like, that's just the divine power of bosses?
No, I'm saying that employers are helping you survive. They're not making your life worse. So they're not
that's not
making
true.
you.
What do they do with a political system?
That is an interesting take. But you know what, Dan? We have spent a lot of time on this, and I cannot tell you.
I appreciate it.
Call
Yes.
back in about A equals A. I want to talk to you about A equals A, maybe on a Thursday.
Yes.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank
And
you.
Dan, your boss
And I am really
appreciates your loyalty.
sorry
Yeah.
about your inability to have children.
If only.
Wait, did I get that right?
No, it's the other way around.
Okay, no, right. You are fertile.
Do we have his theme song though? Maybe just to play him out.
I love the idea of a deserted island, but there's an employer.
It is, of course.
I'm alone on this island, except there's a job
The
creator.
harrowing story of Employer Island.
Robinson Crusoe LLC.
Dan's a good sport.
Yeah,
Dan's a good sport.
That's the plot to Castaway, right?
You know, Dan sounds older than I think. I mean, is he? I forgot to ask how old Dan was. He sounds older. That's so funny. Sounds older than I would imagine he must be.
Well, we should say though, Dan, as Ayn Rand fans go, you weren't, you're at the top
Sporting.
of the heap. Yeah.
I love the libertarians who are not libertarians.
Objectivist.
I know. Yeah,
It's an even more myopic perspective on the world, which is somehow possible.
Penny from New Mexico says, I can't believe you're still wasting time with this guy. I'd much prefer hearing other more thoughtful and important conversations from the MR audience. I've actually turned off the show for long stretches and come back to find you still talking to him. I know I can't, but you missed the part about the deserted island, except for the boss. That's that would have been a twist in Lost. Right, like that.
Yes, right. That's what they find when they find the bunker.
Show.
Right.
What is this? Is this a job opening? I didn't know there was any civilization on this island.
Oh my god!
I can get in on the ground floor in the mailroom.
Yeah,
It's glorious.
yeah. That is the ultimate manifestation of that point about reactionaries wanting to naturalize historically contingent, it's social structures that, you find it just like unimaginable that you could have any situation without employer-employee relations. Like, you're imagining you're imagining a deserted island away from civilization, and somehow you still have an employer there.
Wow.
Boss Island.
Yeah, so this is.
I think you blew Rob's mind. He's like,
That's just it's just a funny thing because, like, when you do these debates with conservatives, like resorting to island-based hypotheticals is something that libertarians go, "Oh, you socialists are always coming up with some crazy scenario where you're on an island or it's science fiction." It's like everyone reaches for those like social hypotheticals. I just enjoy that. They really ran well with him on that for how clumsily he put that one together. So that was kind of extra sweet for me a little bit. I like those moments. I got to say, too, just throw this in real fast. This isn't on topic at all, but I just love listening to Sam Seder. I appreciate Sam has a long career and he's done a lot for the left. I love Majority Report like everyone else. But whenever he speaks to people, I now only hear Hugo, the food inspector from Bob's Burgers.
Well, actually, when he was on this show, the first thing I told him at the beginning of the episode, and this is true, is that, my wife, Jennifer, not being a weird political obsessive like us, is usually doesn't know, the names of the different, guests. I say whatever, I've got, that, even if it's, like people who might be a prominent political name or whatever, like she isn't necessarily somebody who's familiar with. And as I told him, tonight was not an exception. So I've got Sam Seder on, and that didn't mean anything to her. But then I was like, oh, Hugo from Bob's Burgers. And that, we met something, she was like excited about that, that it was.
It's exciting, but I mean, it's gotta be tough though when you're a libertarian, you're already on, you're calling into a progressive show, you're going to have a tough time. And then you're just getting totally paddled and by a very funny, and just the funny voice, I feel just adds to how painful that must be to see. It's pretty great.
Yeah, exactly. So this is his YouTube channel. Gene found for us, the Selfishness Project.
Yeah, that's great. Look at young Mr. Norton there.
Yeah.
He's ready. He's in his tie. He's excited about going to work for the Reagan administration and introducing means tests to the AIDS to family with the dependent children program.
Yeah.
He looks pretty happy.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, this is the most recent video, corrected smears of Ayn Rand, Social Security and welfare. Yeah, this is another one, voluntary funding of roads, firefighting, and police.
Yeah, like we used to do back when we had big, adequate private versions of these things, which used to happen in history, I imagine. I should think.
Yes, right. Well, I mean, I think that it's one of the most memorable scenes from Gangs of New York. You know, the different private fire departments fighting it out to decide who got to, or I know. I try to, I was a big fan of like the Mike Duncan History of Rome podcast. And I try to keep those references down because the Roman history stuff gets super pretentious sounding. But I like that's one of the details for that podcast that was stuck in my head the most. Crassus is like the richest man in the late Roman Republic. One of the ways that he got so rich, of course, they didn't have anything like a fire department, is that when somebody's house was on fire, he would send over a bunch of slaves with buckets of water, and then he would go and negotiate with the owners about buying the house. And, he'd put it out if they sold. And under the circumstances, as you would imagine, people were willing to sell pretty cheap.
Literal fire sale prices.
There you go.
Exactly. So let's see. Lee, I think, misunderstood something pretty basic when we were talking earlier. So where's your support, your evidence the candidate is more likely to win if they don't support Medicare for all? I don't think anybody here said that, that candidates were more likely to win because they didn't support Medicare for all. I think that the argument was that we exaggerate the extent to which we've won that war, that there is like a lot of people's initial reaction is, like the majority of people's initial reaction, whether it's a big majority or it's like a 52% kind of majority, depends a lot poll to poll, but the majority of people's initial reaction is pretty positive, right? That like, oh, how would you like it if there's something like Medicare, and but it's for everybody, right? That's, I think most people hear that and they have an initially positive reaction, but then I think the two things that we need to be honest about on the left are that, one, there's a lot of just more education work to be done. Like I think a lot of people who say yes to those initial polls don't actually understand the difference between Medicare for all and public option, or why that difference matters, right? Like, and so that's just more work for us, more work to be done. Like it's work we need to be doing. And then the other thing is just that it's a lot of it's relatively shallow support, that you like, the point is not that people are more likely to win because they don't support it. I actually think the opposite is true. I think that you're more likely to win if you do, because it sounds, most people correctly hear that and think that sounds like something that would benefit them. And I definitely think this is a very winnable war for us. This is something that we start on good footing on. So the point is not that candidates are more likely to win if they don't. It's just that I think we exaggerate the extent to which we've educated and organized our way to the point that we have some large majority that's like committed to Medicare for all. Like, I just don't think that's the case yet. Yet is the key word.
And I think we also in the political sphere, I think we overestimate the power of progressives, right? I mean, like, look at someone like AOC. This is an interesting statistic. AOC won her primary with less votes than Shahid Buttar lost his primary in San Francisco. So, we have a hell of a lot of organizing to do to create an infrastructure in which we can both get people to the Congress elected that will support Medicare for all, and that we have sufficient organizational power to pressurize those people to keep them honest to the political agenda without like a firm organizational power, extra congressional organizational power. Even if we do elect progressives, they will be co-opted by the system because there's no other institutional option for them But we need to create that balance of power. And mobilizing for Medicare, I think, is a really critical thing. And that has to be educating people and telling them what this program is, and not some just vague, like, would you like people to like not go bankrupt when they get cancer?
Yeah, which, although, again, like, would you like people to not go bankrupt when they have cancer? I mean, this is like that is a really good line, and that I think is a good example of why this is potentially absolutely a winning issue for us, because like I think that most normal human beings can see the appeal of that, right? That like, yeah, like it would be good that people could get cancer without going bankrupt, and the more we're talking about that, like the more that's a winnable conversation for us. But yeah, again, like the Natalie Shure analogy is a good one, that it's like you've crossed that first hurdle, that people will sign the union card, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've finished your sort of groundwork of educating and organizing, so that like you're actually going to win the certification vote, right? You know, like I just think we need to be honest about where we're at. And I think this idea, you know, without rehashing certain old battles that, you know,
no, don't say it. Don't say it.
I'm not going to use the phrase, but I think that there's this idea that's out there that that most of the public is already at that you'll win the certification vote level in that analogy. And so that like if they find out the truth that, you know, centrist Democrats don't support Medicare for all, they'll like rebel against them and, you know, and kick them all out next time or whatever. And man, I would love to live in that world. I don't think that's true yet, right? Like I think like Joe Biden was pretty open about not supporting Medicare for all in those primaries, and he still won. He didn't win because most people are against it, but I do think that the fact that he won anyway shows that we have a lot more work to do in laying that basic groundwork of educating and organizing. And yeah, and I think the point you just made, Gene, is incredibly important, that like you're not going to win a big reform like Medicare for all. Like I don't remember off the top of my head what percentage of the American economy is made up of by the healthcare sector, but it's not negligible. Like it's a you know, that's like a pretty real percentage of the economy. So this would be a huge victory against capital to like shift that entire sector outside of the market, which is essentially what we're talking about. And they're not gonna give that up. Like they're not gonna give that up without a hell of a fight. And right now, we just don't have much of an army yet.
Indeed, a lot of consciousness raising in front of us. That's what they used to call that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think that we, you know, again, the point is not defeatism, right? Like that, like I absolutely think that like I actually think this is the issue we should be spending the most time talking about, because I think this is, out of all of our issues, I think this is the one where there's the most, you know, where the ground is most fertile. Right, because I think that you know I think that's such a winning argument with most people, that you shouldn't go bankrupt, you know, because you have cancer. But yeah, right now I don't think that most people that like I think that there's a lot of work left to do on public understanding of what Medicare for all even is and how it's different from other healthcare reforms. And I think there's a hell of a lot of work to be done left on the grassroots organizing level to get to the point where, I mean, right now, like, yeah, the thing Gene said earlier, like what we have is, you know, I mean, there's a certain sense in which it's not a left at all. Like Adolf Fried says, like what we have is at best like something that will later in retrospect we'll say that was the left, right? You know, that like, but like it's not. We don't have, you know, like we don't have an organized working class, which is the basis for all successful socialist movements. I mean,
and that's why the movement is permanently caught up. I mean, like, I think the rise of social media and things like YouTube and these kind of shows has given some people a false sense of how powerful the left is, because of two things. You have an engaged set of people who consume this media all the time and develop parasocial relations with hosts in this sphere. So it becomes a great part of their worldview. And on a concrete sense, it has brought together those left tendencies that were kind of disparate across the country and didn't have ways of contacting each other through the mechanisms of social media. But on an institutional sense, Well, on an institutional sense, there's no real national left across the country. The electoral power and social power, and it's dominated by, frankly, people like us, maybe downwardly mobile members of the bourgeoisie, PMC types, and this is why the politics of the left tends to get derailed with a lot of PMC neuroses about things rather than focusing on concrete issues. And I think, like, my position is always that, people like me should not be, maybe we can do media stuff, but like we should not be in leadership positions, but we should be like taking our cues at the very least from people, people who come up. It's not to fetishize like working class people, but I think at least on the balance of things, there's way too many downwardly mobile creative types and intellectuals who are leading this movement and not enough working class people. And this is distracting us from the concrete necessities of building a left, which includes unionizing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, what I said on the, on the show on Monday, was I'm, it's kind of talking about like what the point of doing debates is and all that stuff. And, and what I said is look, this is a place where I think I can make a contribution, but don't get me wrong. Like a political strategy that was all about debates and media stuff is an awful political strategy.
Right.
And if I think a diversity of people can serve a diversity of different roles, but like also like if I fell off one end of a lifeboat and a really good union organizer fell off the other, and you're not actually my friend, right? You're just a fellow participant. I would not blame you for swimming out to save the union organizer first. In fact, I think that's probably the right call. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, that we don't have that organized working class, which, is certainly in a modern, industrial, country or whatever, where you can't have like the guerrilla FOCO out in the mountains that takes power, like that's the only possible basis of successful socialist politics. So like you end up getting people like sort of divided into media cliques based on, whether like they hate AOC or they're kind of defensive of AOC. But like the real thing is, yeah, look, I mean, I was disgusted when she buckled on the Iron Dome thing. But
no, it's worse than that. It's not even AOC anymore. It's like whether you a Vash fan or not a Vash fan.
Yeah, that is actually worse because it's further away from real politics.
Right.
But
you're giving them way too much credit.
But like the real thing in the AOC case is that's like whatever, like her, don't like her, that's personality, right? The real thing is we need to get to a point where we have the grassroots infrastructure that if we elect somebody and then they make decisions that we don't like, we can enforce some kind of consequences. And right now, the reality is that we just don't, which is one of the reasons that it's so easy it's so common that that elected social democrats will buckle into pressure from, the centrist Democratic Party leadership because there's nobody who's in a position to exert counter pressure, right? What pressure? And to be clear, what counter pressure means is not people yelling on YouTube. That's meaningless. That's just noise. What pressure would mean is like, hey, we have an organization on the ground. We have these like unions that are led by by people who are affiliated with the movement, and the member of the and like the AFT in the Bronx is not going to knock on doors for you. If you don't vote the way that we like, right? Like that would be real pressure, like that. Like that's like just not even in the same conversation as like whether you're saying nice things about somebody or mean things about them on YouTube or whatever. I mean, like that's, I think, largely a distraction and I think mostly has the effect of demoralizing people anyway. I think for pretty obvious reasons.
We're so cucked. The left is so cucked. We have to accept our weakness and understand that before we can cross the Rubicon and take power. I do. You know, I do agree with you, Ben. Like, yelling on YouTube is not gonna.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a, you know, I mean, this is a mechanism for at best for political education, you know, which is a very necessary thing, but it's wildly insufficient for actually achieving any of your political goals. Like, this is not in my interest to say, because, like, you know, my you know, obviously I have a vested interest in people staying logged on, you know, but like I will do what Ayn Rand doesn't want me to do and sacrifice my self-interest here and say, like, at a certain point, if you want to change the world, like, you got to log off and start knocking on some doors.
You got to meet real people in meet space and talk to them and stuff like that.
Yeah, you know, all the education, the media making, and the YouTube, I mean, obviously it has its place. I mean, the right wing is incredibly successful and they dominate everything. And their YouTube game is stunning. I mean, they pour money in, they can buy ads, they can, you know, make Facebook take down their misinformation strikes so they can keep their sponsored accounts and stuff like that. So obviously it has its place. But yeah, fundamentally, man, the right got to this point by being a big old, IRL, you know, organizing drive. So,
yeah, I mean,
in your workplace. As much as I love left-wing media, and I made, you know, a big side gig out of it, like, it's part of the process. But if you're not organizing in fresh people, I mean, I think the left, most of the left realizes how hilariously powerless we are and have been. But yeah, like, this is the path out, is by actually getting a real organized basis for it. As much fun as all these left-wing media are.
I mean, look, the right wing, they have a good YouTube game, and that's clearly part of why they're so successful. But, like, ultimately, they can mobilize real people to go out to their school board meeting to, like, scream at some hapless, PTA person that she's a communist because who wants to teach critical race theory to our children and put pornography in the library, you know, like. And that's effective because, you know, they're actually out there intimidating people in real life. You know, the just anything that's a political strategy that doesn't you know, involve going out to, you know, and again, I'm certainly not, you know, to be clear, I'm certainly not saying these are mutually exclusive. If I thought they're mutually exclusive, I would feel honor bound to stop doing what I'm doing, right? You know, I absolutely think that this is, you know, that political education, you know, doing debates, which is the only way to in an era of incredibly segmented audiences, is the only way to ever get to speak to somebody else's audience. Doing, you know,
how dare you platform Charlie Kirk?
That's one of the funniest things I ever saw. I saw that too, and I went kind of nuts laughing at it. Yeah. Way to go, Ben. Thanks to you, Charlie Kirk is famous now. I hope you're happy, Ben.
Yeah.
That was some guy from Spectre magazine.
Yes.
The woke Jacobin.
Yes. I in fact, my ability to platform people is so powerful that when I debated Charlie Kirk, that, like, altered the fabric of space-time to make it retroactively true that he spoke at the Republican National Convention in 2020.
Oh, wow. I don't know if we can hang out anymore, Ben, now that I know about these horrible things that you've done to make Charlie Kirk famous. Whoa. Holy cow. That's how things work. Gosh.
Yeah. No, I am pretty sure that if you as we've been urging, log off and, you know, and go outside and, you know, have some fresh air and all that stuff, and you stop people on the street until you find one who knows who Charlie Kirk is, that's not going to be nearly as time consuming a process as going out until you find somebody who knows who Ben Burgis is, right? You know, like this guy is
the legend of Ben Burgis.
Yeah, this guy has a huge audience, unfortunately, right? I mean, obviously, in a more just world, that would not be the case, but he does. And so the question is, are you going to try to speak to anybody in that audience who might be persuaded to stop having those views, or are you just going to surrender that audience to the Kirks of the world? You know, and I think, you know.
Whoa. Yeah, it just makes me laugh. Like, that's exactly right. Of course, it's like, this is how you get in front of people. Bernie Sanders can go on a Fox thing and, like, partially turn some people around. That's, you know, that's an incredibly encouraging thing. But I saw people who were saying, well, thanks to Bernie going on, legitimizing Fox.
Yes, because
Bernie made Fox accepted. That's another thing that he did besides causing Trump. That's Now we're
because God knows Fox needed Bernie to legitimize them. Like they,
finally.
Yeah.
And you know what drives me particularly crazy about that is that I really, Fox is odious, but like, for example, if you've been to Iraq, like I have, the New York freaking Times is odious. MSNBC is odious. All these, all these media apparatuses, whether they're private or the state ones that are abroad, they're all bloody terrible, right? But they are the infrastructure that exists. And if you can get on there and say your message without like selling out or diluting or like pulling your punches, then, people got mad at someone like Angela Nagel or for going on Tucker, not because she went on Tucker per se, but because she kind of like folded in front. That was the problem. The problem wasn't her going on Tucker, and people confuse those two problems, right?
No, exactly. Like if you're going on Tucker to agree with him, I have an issue with that. But if you're going on Tucker to disagree with him, that seems like a public service to me. I mean, like I mean that's always, yeah. If I especially, I guess it also depends what you're agreeing with him about, right? But you might find like some, whatever, like there are broken clocks, blah blah blah, right? But like, but if you're agreeing with him about like immigration, right? That's a problem. And I think look, if I, in the extremely unlikely event that I was ever invited to go on Tucker Carlson's show, I don't think that would happen for a variety of reasons, including the fact that in my last book I referred to him as a toxic propagandist, and probably somebody on his staff, is in charge of like Googling people, before they book them, and they probably run into that line, but like in the supremely unlikely event that I got that invitation, I would say yes, and I would do my best to plant whatever seeds of doubt I could within like whatever hilariously small amount of speaking time that I got, since that's how cable news works, unfortunately, which is also, by the way, something the left, now I'm just talking about media, right? I'm not even talking about touching grass on, and organizing people in meat space, but like just in media, I think this is one way that YouTube is probably bad for us, because like this really hit me with the last book when I started doing like radio spots. And sometimes like people would invite me on to like radio show to talk about it. And like the way, they saw, I was like, oh, is it okay if we do 2 segments? So you're on for like a, total of 10 minutes, like, it's like, yeah, on YouTube, it takes longer than that for people to just introduce themselves. Like you haven't cleared your throat yet by the time 10 minutes are over.
We do like to bloviate on the YouTubes.
Yeah, we do. And in fact, so I think that's also something that like, and I realize how, I am not unaware of how hilariously hypocritical it is for me to say this, right? But I think that is also an important skill, is learning to say things concisely.
The most successful reform we did on This Is Revolution was restricting the show to 1 hour. It was like, we were like, it's an hour, no more than an hour, better get it done in an hour. Work's a treat for getting things, because, if you have infinite time, everybody wants to get that Chapo magic when they're like, just chitter-chattering, but, we don't have that charisma, I would say.
Yeah, well, speak for yourself, but yeah. So speaking of that hour on This Is Revolution, I'm going to be on This Is Revolution on Tuesday. So that should be fun. And what what are all the times that, like, because I know it's on like a few days a week at this point. So that's
so we do Tuesday night, and then we have a variety of shows on Wednesday night that we switch up every week, which different people do. Then we do Thursday night, and then we do Saturday morning. So we do 3 days a week plus 1, and we're going to be having, I think it's going to be Ben with Cuba, me and Pascal, and we're going to be going. We want to go deep in the first half about Hitchens, and in the second half, we want to talk about Charlie Kirk.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to that. That is definitely a list of people.
And we've got Adolf Reed next week too.
Oh shit! What days is he going to be on?
He's going to be on Thursday. He's going to be talking about his newish article, America's Reichstag movement. I think it's called.
Yeah. Which by the way, one really fun thing about that article, right? I think it's called "The Whole Country is the Reichstag."
Right.
Is that there is a reference to in that article. There's a story that involves our mutual friend Toure Reed, Adolf's son, and also who's this in the story that he mentions. This is here. Let me do a quick screen share. So I don't know. This is just a fun passage in that article, right? Which I don't even agree with everything in the article, and I'm not going to go into that because I revere Adolf Reed. But I anybody who knows my views can find the parts I agree with and the parts I disagree with. We don't need to get into that. But this passage was a lot of fun. He says says once in an argument in Washington D.C. bar with Christopher Hitchens during the Afghan War, I asserted that no place in the world had been made better by the presence of the 82nd Airborne, not even Fayetteville, North Carolina, its home base. That stopped Hitchens in his track momentarily and prompted a chuckle. Then my son reminded me that the one exception to that dictum had been Oxford, Mississippi in 1962.
That's a good one. Yeah, I love that story.
Yeah. All right. Rob, what are you up to? Where can people find it?
Yeah, hey, I just had a lovely article on what's happening with inflation for the current affairs. The right wing is hysterical about inflation. They forgot about critical race theory now. We're excited about inflation. So this is the new thing. Thank you, Mr. David. That you need to be aware of so that you can talk to your semi-coherent relatives. And we do have inflation. Inflation's been 2% or below for most of our lifetimes, since the 80s. So this is a good opportunity for some of y'all who might be a little younger to just remember what inflation is. It'll be a little bit elevated for the next year or two, at least, as we go through the hangover of the COVID lockdowns and all the supply chain disruptions that have come from that. So you can check that article out on Current Affairs. Affairs is back after our recent drama. We have some really, really quality, nice articles and podcasts coming out, and we're reorganizing internally, and you'll be hearing about that. So lots of good stuff to come. Check out there.
Nice. Yeah. So that is good stuff. Yeah, we should talk about that article sometime. The why you shouldn't. Why you shouldn't buy into to right wing hysteria about inflation? That seems like a really useful kind of article to write. So yeah. Also, my man's written a bunch of books and stuff. You should check those out too.
Oh yeah, I have books. People should look at them up and buy them all.
Yeah, there you go.
Obviously.
All right. Thanks, guys. When we originally envisioned this, it was like, oh, well, the debate we're watching is so short, the whole thing will be like an hour. But then we had too much fun talking. So that's Lucas says also UWT has a labor solidarity project. Rob should plug that.
I should. My man Alex runs that. That's a U of Washington, Tacoma. So where I live specifically, we have a very cool set of lecture series being run by my friend Alex, who's a professor there. Folks, if you look up UWT, Labor Solidarity, you'll see that. I've done a talk for it. Lots of other folks have. Lucas knows how cool it is. So that's something, folks. If you're anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, look into that.
Right. Oh, and I should say, I can't believe I forgot this until the bitter end. But one of the people in that video, Emma Vigland, is probably, I believe. Anyway, we were like DMing about it during this actually, but I believe she's going to be on Give Them an Argument on Monday night. Talk a little bit about Ayn Rand and fertility and whatever might come up there. She's not going to be the only guest, but she will be on. on Monday night. We're also going to get one of my non-leftist friends. I'm sorry, I do have some. The Thaddeus Russell, who we're going to do like a buddy cop movie thing and co-teach a class about Karl Marx. I like him. Thad doesn't, So we're gonna talk about that. Should be fun for everybody. So both of those people will be on the show on Monday. The Monday after that is going to be Anna Kasparian. We're going to go over some highlights of her debate with Ben Shapiro, which if you have not seen it, I really could not have been happier about how that went. I really enjoyed watching that. And then the week after that is my favorite Slovenian is back on the show. So,
Snuffleman's coming back, huh?
Snuffleman's coming back. Yeah. That's no. So if you're thinking my favorite Slovenian is Luka or maybe Melania Trump, or I can't even continue the joke because those are two of the three Slovenians I've ever heard of. But no. This is Slavoj Žižek, which is always a really fun interview. He's like a white Slovenian version of interviewing Pascal. So that's you just those guys you just kind of ask a question and set them off and just sit back and watch them do their thing. So lots of good stuff. Lots of good stuff coming up.
Oh yeah, Leibacher from Slovenia.
There you go. Now we have four. We have four Slovenians that collectively the three of us could think of. So we're making some progress here. By the way, Logan, I saw your super chat earlier. We did show that on the screen, but I didn't stop to talk about it. Yes, I would obviously love to talk about the Hitchens book on MR. Clearly, I would take that invitation. So yes. The answer to your question is yes. That sounds fun. But yeah, that's So good stuff coming up. Watch all of that. Watch This Is Revolution. Our compatriot, podcast. Within the GTAA left reckoning. This is Revolution family, and read all of Rob's stuff. And we are actually going to call it a night right there. So yeah, left is best.